28th of April 1945. Berlin, the capital of the Thousand-Year Reich, was a bombed-out burning ruin. The Red Army, which had reached Berlin's eastern suburbs on Hitler's last birthday, 20th of April, had for the past 8 days steadily surrounded the city and fought its way towards the center. The still heavily defended government quarter, the massive official buildings of the Nazi state still stoutly defended by some 5,000 SS troops, and a miscellany of battle-broken army units, some sailors, and Volkssturm home guards and rabidly loyal Hitler youths. Adolf Hitler hadn't been outside his bunker, deep beneath the Reich Chancellery's winter garden, since his birthday. He had seemingly resigned himself to death, and it was now a question of when that death would come and the manner of the Führer's passing. The bunker was still operating as a command center, though a very inadequate one, and the immediate situation in the streets outside was being carefully monitored, but for the time being the defense was holding. The Soviets were reported to be some 1 kilometer from the Führerbunker. Hitler had been greatly affected by news which had come to him that day from the BBC of all places, which had reported that Hitler's most loyal acolyte, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, had been secretly negotiating an end to the war with the Western Allies. By the evening, Hitler had raged against Der Treue Heinrich, sending out orders that he was to be stripped of his posts, arrested and executed, though the power no longer existed to punish Himmler, now far to the north. Hitler had taken out his rage on Himmler's liaison man at Führer headquarters, Hermann Fegelein, who was executed under murky circumstances. Please see my series about Hermann Fegelein, link in the end screen and description box. It was clear to Hitler that the defense of the Reich Chancellery area must fold in a day or two, and combined with Himmler's treachery, he made up his mind about an important personal matter. With him in the bunker was his girlfriend since 1929, Eva Braun. She had voluntarily arrived in the Führerbunker from the safety of Bavaria on the 15th of April 1945, much to Hitler's initial disapproval, but she had refused to leave, stating that she wished to stay by his side to the bitter end. For a woman who had been deliberately kept in the background and shadows by Hitler for all of their long relationship, living either at his grand house, the Berghof at Obersalzberg, or in a house in the Munich suburbs, Braun now deliberately placed herself front and center in the final drama of the Third Reich. Hitler was impressed by his consort's determination and pluck, later comparing it unfavorably with several of his inner circle who had bolted from Berlin at the first opportunity, notably his deputy Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, by now also disgraced. Eva Braun seems to have seen for herself the role of First Lady of the Reich, something she had desired for years. Now she would have that position at Hitler's side at the very violent end of the regime she and her family had profited from. But there was one thing she wanted above all else from Hitler, a ring on her finger, marriage, and this she had worked assiduously at in the bunker for several days, until Hitler had finally relented. It would be Eva's reward for her loyalty. And as for loyalty, among Hitler's circle of ministers, only 2 now remained in the Führerbunker, the rest having fled Berlin for safer locales on various pretexts. One was Hitler's private secretary and minister without portfolio who ran the party chancellery across Germany, Martin Bormann. The other was the propaganda minister Dr. Joseph Goebbels, who had accepted Hitler's invitation to move into the bunker with his wife Magda and their young children. Goebbels and his wife were also under no illusions. If Berlin fell, they would die with the regime.
In der vorgeschobenen Stellung einer Sturmgeschützabteilung.
As well as being propaganda minister, Goebbels was also Gauleiter of Berlin. Later, on the 28th of April, Hitler came to a personal decision. He spoke to Goebbels, telling him that he had decided to marry Fräulein Braun. Arrangements were to be made at once. Whilst these arrangements were being made, Hitler withdrew with one of his private secretaries, Traudl Junge, to begin dictating his last will and testament and his political testament. It took several hours to do this. In the meantime, Goebbels ordered a mid-level civil servant from the Berlin Gauleitung to be found and brought to the Führerbunker. A detachment of SS in one of the last functional armoured half-tracks was dispatched to the house of Walter Wagner, the official Goebbels had selected to marry his boss and his girlfriend in the bunker. I am indebted to author Ian Sayer for providing photos of the elusive Wagner, the results of many years' research on his part. Please visit his website, nazi-gold.com, link in the description box. Wagner was at that time a 37-year-old lawyer and notary, and head of the central legal department of the Berlin Gauleitung, and known personally to Goebbels, who had appointed him to this position in January 1944. Too young to have served in World War I, and in essentially a reserved occupation for most of World War II, Wagner wore the brown political uniform of the NSDAP, and had served in Poland representing Goebbels and Gau Berlin during a program to resettle Germans into annexed Polish territory. Based in Posen until February 1944, Wagner knew the local Gauleiter Arthur Greiser. It was in Posen that Wagner met his future wife, Cordula Kröpels, who was a National Socialist People's Welfare social worker, also working on resettlement in Poland. They married in March 1944, and Wagner moved to an apartment in Berlin-Buch, where he also had a position on the local council in charge of refuse collection services for his district. Due to the incessant Allied air raids on Berlin, Wagner had sent his pregnant wife to her mother's house on one of the North Frisian Islands, his son Michael being born there on the 1st of November 1944. In October, Wagner, as an able-bodied male, then aged 37, was drafted into one of the 92 battalions of the Berlin Volkssturm Home Guard, receiving some limited military training. He was appointed a platoon commander. He continued to live in his apartment with his sister Gustl also living with him. When the SS from Hitler's bunker arrived at Wagner's apartment, his sister told them that he was with his unit at the front, at that time holding positions in the Friedrichstrasse area. The SS went to the Volkssturm unit's command post and Wagner was located. Bewildered, his uniform covered in dust and dirt from frontline action, Wagner was bundled into the half-track and driven to the Reich Chancellery. In the meantime, hasty preparations were being made in the Führerbunker for the marriage ceremony. It was now very early on the 29th of April 1945. The cramped room where Hitler held his twice-daily military situation conferences, known as the Map Room, was rearranged by the Führer's SS guards, overseen by his faithful valet, SS Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Linger. Chairs were arranged before a table. For those of the staff not privy to the forthcoming ceremony, the sudden flurry of activity caused a ripple of gossip throughout the lower bunker. Wagner suddenly appeared in the lower bunker in his brown party uniform, escorted by 2 SS officers of Hitler's bodyguard unit. SS Sergeant Rokus Misch, who was manning the bunker telephone switchboard, asked one of his colleagues what was afoot. He was told that the man in the brown uniform was the registrar. Misch was confused until his colleague explained that the man was a city councillor and a regional party leader. "The boss is getting married today," said Misch's colleague. Goebbels explained to Wagner what was going to happen. So why was Wagner selected to marry Hitler and Eva Braun? As a licensed notary public, Wagner was also authorized under the law to perform civil weddings. The conference room now became a registry office, and the ceremony, as many of you I'm sure know, is a simplified version of what would happen inside a church. In the case of Hitler's wedding, due to wartime conditions, the civil ceremony was extremely simple, but still contained strong National Socialist elements. Wagner took his place behind the table, sorting the necessary forms out and beginning to fill them in, and then into the room stepped Hitler and Eva Braun, followed by the 2 witnesses, Martin Bormann and Dr. Goebbels. Hitler was dressed in his customary field-grey tunic and black trousers. He looked very much older than 56, was stooped and his face grey and unhealthy, his eyes reddened and restless. Eva wore a black dress, a favourite of Hitler's. and her hair and makeup were perfect as usual. Goebbels indicated to Hitler's attendants to leave them, and the door was closed. Hitler and Eva sat in chairs before the table, while Bormann and Goebbels sat behind them. It was quite ironic that the man brought in to marry Hitler was surnamed Wagner, given Hitler's devotion to the composer of the same name, but the Führer appeared preoccupied and barely acknowledged Wagner's presence. Wagner had the requisite marriage forms, and in a voice cracking with nervousness, he solemnly asked Eva and Hitler, in turn, whether they were of pure Aryan descent and free from hereditary diseases. They said they were. Following some brief formalities, Wagner declared them to be man and wife, and invited them to sign the marriage register. Hitler signed first, his hand trembling, but he managed a decent copy of his usual signature. When Eva signed, she wrote Eva B. before realizing her mistake and scratching out the B, writing instead Hitler Geb Braun, Hitler formerly Braun. Then Bormann and Goebbels signed, followed by Wagner, who had completed the relevant sections of the forms. In total, the wedding ceremony had lasted less than 10 minutes. Bormann and Goebbels congratulated the couple, the doors opened, Hitler kissed Eva's hand, and together they walked into the corridor where many of the other bunker personnel waited, Hitler and Eva shaking hands with them. Then Hitler and Eva withdrew to the Führer's private rooms, where a simple wedding breakfast of champagne and sandwiches awaited, with Bormann, Goebbels and his wife, and Hitler's 2 secretaries, Gerda Christian and Traudl Junge, joining them to toast their health. Wagner was also allowed to attend the wedding breakfast, but was present for only some 20 minutes, eating a liverwurst sandwich and drinking a glass or 2 of champagne, and chatting briefly to Eva, before he was conducted from the bunker and driven back to his unit in the front line. After Wagner's departure, more guests joined the party, Generals Hans Krebs and Wilhelm Burgdorf, Hitler's Luftwaffe adjutant, Colonel Nicholas von Belau, Werner Naumann, State Secretary of the Ministry of Propaganda, as well as Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann, and Foreign Ministry representative at Führer headquarters, Ambassador Walter Wagner, and SS Major Günscher, Colonel Linger, and Hitler's Austrian cook and dietitian Constanze Manziali. It was a rather morbid feast, as Hitler, drinking tea and picking at sandwiches, spoke of his plan to end his own life, and that National Socialism was dead. He said that death would be a relief to him now that he had been betrayed by his best friends. Frau Junge stayed only briefly at the party, as she was still busy typing up Hitler's last will and testament and his political testament. During the breakfast, Hitler 3 times came to Junge's office to see how far she had got. At the party, Hitler discussed the list of new government appointments for a cabinet after his death, speaking to Bormann and Goebbels on this matter. Any changes were likewise duly transmitted to Junge's typing job. She gave the documents to Goebbels. By now, Eva Hitler had retired to rest. Hitler and the witnesses then signed the documents, and at 6 a.m. on the 29th of April, Hitler finally went to bed. For Walter Wagner, his future was to be shorter than Hitler's. Wagner's unit had been pushed back to the Potsdamer Platz. The fighting was really intense. Company commander Erich Illing was severely wounded by Soviet tank fire, and Wagner, who commanded No. 1 platoon in the company, stepped up as temporary company commander. He continued to direct the fire of his men until he too was shot through the head and killed less than 24 hours after marrying Hitler and Eva. In the chaos of the Battle of Berlin, his body was never identified. Just another corpse thrown into a mass grave after the 2nd of May when the Germans surrendered the city. Only in 1951 was Wagner's widow issued with a death certificate. She remarried, and she and her son lived in Hamburg. As for the marriage of Hitler and Eva, it lasted only some 40 hours. Both of them dying together in Hitler's bunker study on the 30th of April 1945. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.